came on Daystar and you publicly affirmed their relationship as being of the Lord. Can you do that in good conscience without having talking to Lisa to get her side of the story?
I don't care. The great thing about being my age is I just don't care. I've got a good quality of life.
The unthinkable just happened on live TV. In a moment no one saw coming, Jimmy Evans dropped a shocking revelation that left Joni Lamb speechless and millions of viewers stunned. What was supposed to be a calm discussion turned into a public unraveling, exposing secrets that had long been buried beneath smiles and faith. The tension, the silence, the look on her face, it said everything. This wasn't just television, it was a reckoning broadcast to the world. No one in the studio was ready for what happened that day. The cameras were rolling, the lights were warm, and everyone expected another calm conversation about faith and family. Joni Lamb sat across from Pastor Jimmy Evans, a familiar face, a trusted friend, someone who had always been seen as the voice of reason. But within minutes, the tone changed. His calm voice began to tremble ever so slightly, and you could feel the air in the room shift. This wasn't going to be another friendly interview. Something real was about to come out. Jimmy leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes heavy. "I need to be honest," he said quietly. The audience fell silent. He spoke about a moment years earlier, one that had haunted him ever since. It was during a family meeting, a moment that was supposed to bring peace, but instead created a wound that never healed. He had been asked to convince Jonathan Lamb to submit fully to his mother, Joni, as if she spoke directly for God. At the time, he told himself he was helping. He said the words he thought would calm the storm. But even as they left his mouth, they felt wrong. "I told him his mother was the voice of God," Jimmy admitted. "And I knew in my spirit that wasn't true." You could hear people gasp quietly. Joni's expression froze, her usual poise replaced by something sharp and uncertain. Jimmy continued, voice low but steady. He said he had carried that guilt for years, that silence had eaten away at him. "I thought I was protecting the ministry," he said, "but I was protecting control, not truth." The words hit hard. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't accusing, just confessing. That honesty, that raw moment, spoke louder than any sermon he'd ever preached. For the audience, it was shocking. For Joni, it was devastating. Her carefully built image of unity and faith was cracking on live TV. Jimmy wasn't trying to destroy her, he was trying to set himself free. "I stayed quiet for too long," he said softly, "but silence can become sin when it hides the truth." The studio was silent, except for his voice. There were no applause, no smiles, just the sound of truth finally breaking through years of pretense. By the time the broadcast ended, viewers were already flooding social media. Clips were spreading everywhere, and the story that had been hidden for so long was now out in the open. Jimmy Evans had done what no one else had dared to do. He told the truth, and in doing so, he shook, not just the studio, but the foundation of everything that Daystar claimed to stand for. It was supposed to be a moment of healing. That's what everyone thought when Jonathan Lamb called for the family meeting. No cameras, no lights, no producers, just the people who mattered most sitting down to talk. For years, there had been whispers, tension, and pain buried under forced smiles and polite silence. Marcus Lamb, the family's leader and the heart of Daystar, was gone, and the cracks that had always been there were starting to show. Jonathan hoped that if they could just be honest, maybe something could still be saved. The family, the ministry, or at least their trust in each other.
The truth and to not be a part of a cover-up, and that's led us to where we are now completely free, not attached to any sort of major institution or any type of control, to where we're able to be a voice for truth and to be able to stand up against injustice and be a voice for others out there who are have been through abuse or been through a difficulty or been part of a culture that encourages people to cover things up. We're so excited that we can help be a force that can shine the light on the darkness and allow the Lord to do a cleansing work in the body of Christ. So thank you all for all the people that have written to us and supported us and loved on us. It's really just been so overwhelming.
The meeting wasn't held in some big boardroom or studio. It was quiet, simple, a private room where everyone could sit close enough to look each other in the eyes. Jonathan was nervous but hopeful. He'd prayed about this day for weeks, asking God to guide every word. He wanted peace, not confrontation. His wife, Susie, sat beside him, calm but tense. Around the table were his siblings, old family friends, and Jimmy Evans, the pastor who had known them all for decades. And then came Joni. She walked in late, calm and composed, as if she were stepping onto a stage. Everyone went quiet. For a moment, Jonathan thought he saw softness in her eyes, maybe even a sign that she was ready to listen. But that moment vanished the second she sat down. Before anyone could speak, Joni reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. The sharp sound of a timer echoed in the room. "You each have 60 seconds, she said. At first, everyone thought she was joking. 60 seconds to talk about years of pain, confusion, and betrayal? But she wasn't smiling. 1 minute per person, she repeated, her tone flat and firm. The timer started ticking. Jonathan felt his stomach twist. This was supposed to be a safe space, but it already felt like a courtroom, and Joni was the judge. One by one, people spoke. Some voices trembled, others broke completely. Jonathan's sister talked about feeling shut out, how decisions were made without them. A longtime family friend said she didn't recognize the ministry anymore. Even Jimmy Evans spoke softly about how much had changed, how control had replaced connection. Every story carried the same theme: pain, confusion, a longing to be heard. When Jonathan's turn came, he spoke carefully. He didn't want to attack his mother, he wanted her to understand. "Mom," he said, "I just want honesty. I want to heal. But we can't do that if we keep pretending everything's fine." He talked about his father's passing, the choices that followed, and the distance that had grown between them. "This isn't about power or control," he said. "It's about family. It's about truth." The timer beeped, cutting him off mid-sentence. Joni didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she stood, picked up her purse, and said, "You're all operating in fear." No one moved. No one spoke. She walked to the door, paused just long enough to say she had a flight to catch, to New York to see Doug Weiss, and then she was gone. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. For a while, no one knew what to say. Jonathan sat there frozen, his hands trembling. It wasn't anger that filled the room. It was heartbreak. Everything he had hoped for had just fallen apart in front of him. His mother, the woman who had taught him to pray and trust God, had turned their pain into an inconvenience. He looked at the others, his siblings staring at the floor, Susie quietly wiping her tears, Jimmy sitting with his head bowed, and he knew nothing would ever be the same again. Jimmy would later say that the meeting didn't feel spiritual at all. It felt staged, he admitted, like a script that no one else got to read. And when someone turned to him during that meeting and asked him to tell Jonathan to submit to his mother, to obey her as the voice of God, he froze. For a moment he thought about staying quiet, but he didn't. He gave in. He said the words everyone wanted to hear, and the instant they left his mouth, he knew he had made a mistake. For Jonathan and Susie, that was the final straw. They walked out of that meeting hollow, not furious, just empty. Something inside them had cracked beyond repair. They realized that staying meant surrendering the last of their integrity. They couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when their hearts told them otherwise. It wasn't rebellion, it was self-preservation. In the days that followed, the silence grew heavier. Phone calls went unanswered. Texts were ignored. Joni didn't reach out. People who had once been close to the Lambs started to disappear, either out of discomfort or fear. A few, like their friend and counselor Denise Boggs, tried to help. Denise wrote letters to Joni, pleading with her to slow down, to reflect, to seek healing before diving into a new relationship with Doug Weiss. But Joni didn't reply. Instead, she closed herself off even more, surrounding herself with people who told her exactly what she wanted to hear. That meeting marked the beginning of the end. The family that had built a ministry around faith and unity was now divided beyond repair. Jonathan and Susie quietly stepped away from Daystar without public statements or bitterness. They didn't want revenge, they just wanted peace. Meanwhile, on camera, the show went on. Joni smiled, preached, and spoke of faith as if nothing had happened. But behind that polished image, something was gone. The heart that had once connected the Lamb family and the ministry they built had broken in that one quiet room. And from that day forward, everyone who was there knew that the family that once stood together would never truly stand together again. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The Lamb family had built something that millions admired, a Christian network filled with light, hope, and family values. On camera, they laughed together, prayed together, and spoke with confidence about God's faithfulness. Viewers saw a family united by purpose and faith. But behind the bright lights, behind the camera's smiles, something darker had been growing for years. A wound no one wanted to see. A secret buried so deep that even those closest to them pretended it wasn't there. Jonathan Lamb had lived his whole life in the public eye. As Marcus and Joni's son, he had learned early on how to smile for the cameras, how to speak the right words, how to look strong even when things weren't. But when his own daughter started to change, everything inside him began to unravel. It was small things at first. She became quieter, distant, less like herself. She stopped laughing the same way, avoided eye contact, and flinched at certain moments. Jonathan tried to tell himself it was just stress, maybe growing pains. But deep down, he knew. Something was wrong. The truth came out slowly, painfully, piece by piece, until it hit him with full force. The kind of truth that steals the air from your lungs. Someone close to the family, someone trusted, had hurt his daughter. Not emotionally, but in the most devastating way possible. It wasn't a rumor or a misunderstanding. It was real, and it shattered him. In that moment, Jonathan wasn't a television personality or a ministry leader. He was just a father, broken, terrified, desperate to protect his child. He did the only thing that made sense. He went straight to his parents. He believed they would understand. They were people of faith, people who preached truth and righteousness every single day. Surely they would stand with him. Surely they would defend their granddaughter. But that's not what happened. Marcus, his father, listened quietly, his face unreadable. Then, after a long silence, he said it had already been handled. "We looked into it," he said. "It's taken care of." Those words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like a door slamming shut. Jonathan felt his pulse racing. "Handled?" he asked. "How?" Marcus didn't answer directly. There had been conversations, prayers, and an internal review. No police, no formal report, just quiet words behind closed doors. Jonathan couldn't believe it. He turned to his mother, Joni, thinking she would step in, that the woman who had built her life around faith and family would see what was at stake. But she didn't. She refused to believe him. She defended the accused, told him not to overreact, told him that bringing this to the public would hurt the ministry. Her voice was calm, her tone controlled, but her eyes were cold. "We've handled it," she said again. That was the moment Jonathan realized he was alone. The betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. It wasn't just that his parents didn't believe him. It was that they chose to protect the image of their ministry over their own granddaughter's pain. Daystar wasn't just their work, it was their empire. Every broadcast, every dollar, every smiling photo depended on the illusion that the Lamb family was untouchable, perfect, blessed, chosen. And one scandal, even one whispered accusation, could destroy it all. So they buried it. They decided silence would save them. But silence doesn't save, it poisons. Years passed. The family carried on with their routines. Services, shows, family dinners, public appearances. On the outside, nothing changed. On the inside, everything did. Jonathan learned to wear a mask even thicker than before. He smiled on camera. He prayed with his parents. He said all the right words. But every sermon about truth made his stomach twist. Every broadcast about forgiveness felt hollow. How could they talk about faith when they refused to face their own sin? His daughter grew up quietly, stronger, but scarred. She didn't talk much about what had happened, and Jonathan didn't push her to. They both knew that speaking about it would mean tearing down everything the world thought they were. So they carried it. Silently, painfully, pretending it was gone. When Marcus died, Jonathan thought maybe things would finally change. Grief has a way of stripping away pride, of reminding people what really matters. He hoped that losing her husband would soften Joni's heart, that maybe she would want to make things right. But he was wrong. Instead of slowing down, Joni sped up. She threw herself into work with almost manic energy, filling every second of her life with motion. New projects, new events, new plans. And then came Doug Weiss. A new man, a new love, a new story to tell. To the public it looked like redemption, a woman who had lost her husband and found love again. To Jonathan, it felt like betrayal all over again. His father's death was still fresh, his family still broken, and already Joni was smiling for the cameras with someone new by her side. He tried to talk to her about it, not in anger, but out of confusion. "Mom," he said, "this isn't healing, this is running." But she didn't listen. She didn't want to hear anything that didn't fit her version of the story. Soon, even their private conversations became impossible. If he questioned her, she'd accuse him of rebellion. If he disagreed, she'd tell him he was out of God's will. It became clear to everyone around her that Joni wasn't just moving on, she was building walls. Anyone who challenged her was quietly pushed out. Friends like Denise Boggs tried to reach her, writing letters, begging her to slow down, to think, to remember what her family had gone through. Denise's words were full of grace and love, but Joni didn't respond. Instead, she surrounded herself with new voices, ones that told her what she wanted to hear, that she was strong, that she was right, that her choices were anointed. Meanwhile, the weight of the secret, the one that had started it all, was still there, buried under layers of smiles and sermons. Jonathan and his wife Susie carried it like a ghost that never left. They couldn't talk about it, couldn't confront it, couldn't even pray about it without breaking down. But pretending was killing them. Slowly, quietly, it ate away at their peace. Finally, Jonathan reached a point where he couldn't pretend anymore. The ministry that had once meant everything to him now felt like a lie. The family that had preached forgiveness and truth had chosen image over both, and the woman who had taught him to follow God had become unreachable. So he and Susie stepped back. No big announcement, no drama. They just left. Quietly, painfully, and permanently. To the world, it looked like a simple change. Maybe they were taking time for family, maybe they needed rest. But those who paid attention could feel it. Something had shifted. The warmth that had once filled the Daystar broadcasts was gone. The smiles looked tight, the energy felt forced. Viewers wrote in asking what had happened, but the answers never came. Because how do you explain a secret like that? How do you admit that the ministry built on faith was cracking under the weight of unspoken sin? Behind Joni's perfect smile and carefully chosen words, there was a shadow that never left. The memory of what she refused to face. And for Jonathan, that smile became the symbol of everything he had lost. His family, his trust, his peace. Some secrets don't stay buried forever. They wait, beneath the laughter, beneath the sermons, beneath the show, until one day they finally break the surface. And when they do, the truth doesn't just expose what was hidden. It exposes what was lost in the silence. But it didn't happen all at once. The fall of Daystar, the empire that Marcus and Joni Lamb had built with faith, sweat, and a camera, began quietly, almost invisibly. There were no explosions, no public meltdowns, no grand betrayals caught on tape. It started with small things. Whispered doubts, forced smiles, a heaviness in the air that even the best makeup and lighting couldn't hide. What had once been a ministry full of energy and passion had started to feel cold, controlled, and nobody wanted to admit it. After Marcus's death, Joni stepped into full command. For years, she had been seen as his partner in faith, the strong woman beside the man of God. But now, with him gone, she became the sole voice, the face, the authority. At first, people admired her strength. "She's holding it all together," they said. "She's a warrior." And maybe she believed that too. But behind that determination, there was something else. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of letting anyone else steer what she now saw as hers to protect. The meetings at Daystar began to change. What used to be moments of prayer and creative planning turned into long sessions where everyone waited for Joni's approval. People stopped sharing ideas. They stopped disagreeing. They stopped breathing freely. Staff who had been there for years noticed at first how quickly the atmosphere had shifted from faith to tension. It wasn't about vision anymore. It was about obedience. Joni's word became law. She decided everything: what shows aired, what guests were invited, even how people should behave off camera. Some called it leadership. Others called it fear dressed as faith. Employees began to whisper, though only in private. "She doesn't listen anymore," one said. "It's like the mission isn't about God now. It's about her." But they whispered carefully, because at Daystar, Questioning the leader was the same as questioning God, and when Doug Weiss entered the picture, the walls around Joni grew even higher. To the public, Doug was a new beginning, a respected counselor, a man of God, a comforting presence after a loss. But to those inside the ministry, his arrival marked a shift in power. Suddenly, there were new rules, new boundaries, new people being let go without warning. The Lamb family's unity, once their greatest strength, began to fracture even more. Jonathan and Susie had already stepped away, but now even longtime staff members were disappearing. Some were told their season had ended, others were simply frozen out. Still, the broadcasts continued. The music played. The sermons flowed. The cameras captured smiling faces. Viewers watching at home saw the same familiar image: bright lights, polished words, talk of blessings and victory. But those who knew what was happening behind the scenes could feel it. Something holy had turned hollow. Then came the leak, a quiet storm in the form of an audio recording. Jimmy Evans' confession. It spread like wildfire online. In the recording, the trusted pastor admitted that years earlier he had told Jonathan Lamb to submit to his mother Joni, as if she were the voice of God. It was meant to keep peace, but it sounded more like control. When people heard it, the shock was instant. This wasn't just family drama. It was a glimpse behind the curtain of one of Christian television's biggest ministries. The reaction was brutal. Viewers demanded answers. Pastors who had once partnered with Daystar began to distance themselves. Donations slowed. Sponsors quietly backed away. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse of trust. The image of Joni as a humble leader of faith was cracking fast, and every attempt to patch it up only made it worse.